82% of team members feel misunderstood or undervalued. So this is exactly where I like to be, teaching, communicating, helping others, realizing their aspirations. I'm so excited about shattering the glittering image and uncovering the truth about you.
Welcome back to the Intrepid Impact Leadership Show here on YouTube. I'm Jerry Howard, your host, your leadership coach, your business consultant, and certified jail inspector. If you don't know what that means, check out our previous episodes. I think you're going to love it. And you're going to love today's episode too, because we're continuing with the 5 leadership voices. This is the 4th episode we've devoted to the 5 leadership voices because it is so foundational to what we do, not only with the Intrepid Impact team, but with what we do as leaders. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, but just to highlight that is we talk about know yourself to lead yourself. And if you know your leadership voice, if you know how you communicate and how those in your team communicate, then not only will you be heard, but you will hear them. And that's really the key, isn't it? A lot of people start off in business focusing on alignment. And you may have heard me say this before, but I know we've heard it in books where we talk about getting the right people on the bus, getting the right people in the right seats. All of that is extremely important. I can't understate that. It's extremely important to have the right people and having them in the right places. But before we do that, we have to establish a language of leadership, a language that we can all speak. Think about cultures in the world. What is it that unifies a culture? What's the foundational piece? It's the language. It's the language. And if you remember in Genesis, God said that very thing. God said all the people were speaking one language, and he and his governing council in heaven looked down and said that as one unified entity, there is nothing they will accomplish. But they were being led by a spirit that was against heaven or tried to make a name for themselves. So God scattered the people by confusing their language. And so we have different languages in the world. Well, as a unifying entity, Intrepid Impact Leadership Team, that's what we do. We unify organizations around a centralized leadership language. That is epitomized in the 5 leadership voices. So we are continuing with that study today. And if you haven't heard of our show or watched any of our previous episodes, that's okay. I'm going to recap the 5 leadership voices really quickly, but you can always go back and dig into the other shows. And then at the end of the show, towards the end of this show and every show, I like to give you some examples from the Word, from God's Scripture, about what those leadership voices look like in biblical examples. But you can see these everywhere. And my encouragement for you is if you haven't had a chance to read the Bible or you don't know anything about the Bible, talk to somebody who has. Make a friend with somebody. Everybody knows about a person that talks about the Bible, right? Talk to them and then read it for yourself. Read it for yourself. So, beginning with the 5 leadership voices, let's talk about all of them here. Really quickly, we've got the nurturer voice. Nurturer's champion of people, relational harmony, and values. 43% of the population speaks nurturer. We've got creative. That's 9% of the population. They're champions of future ideas, information, and organizational integrity. Then we've got guardian. Champions of due diligence, resources, and efficient systems and processes. They're 30% of the population. Then we've got connector. Today we're going to talk more about the connector, but the summary just is relational networks, effective communication, and internal collaboration. That's really important. As you know, that's what we're talking about here is teamwork. And last, certainly not least, is the pioneer. Pioneer is 7% of the population. They're champions of strategy. They're results focused. And I love to summarize the pioneer because they're all about winning, right? And guardians are all about winning too, but with a different twist on it. But pioneers, strategic, results focused, problem solving, love my pioneers. So that's just a quick recap of the 5 leadership voices. But the big concept, the thing that's so important for you to know is that everyone speaks, but not everyone is heard. Now, if you've been listening to the show for the last few minutes, you've heard me speak quite a bit. But I'm intentionally slowing it down here for you because I cannot emphasize enough that everyone speaks, but not everyone is heard. everyone speaks, but not everyone's heard. Just let that marinate for a little bit. Pause the show if you have to. If you don't take anything away from the 5 leadership voices, just know that thing. Everyone speaks, but not everyone is heard. And so in the previous episodes, we talked about those quieter voices. That's the nuance that drives this concept, is that everyone speaks, but not everyone's heard. If we have a quieter voice, or if we're less likely to speak in a team meeting, then we're less likely to be asked to give input in a team meeting. And ultimately, our input diminishes over time. Conversely, if we speak too often in a team meeting, like the louder voices, then our influence can diminish over time because many of the team members have the quieter voices. In fact, because everyone speaks and not everyone's heard, teams function at less than 60% of their true potential. Less than 60% of their true potential. So remember, what was a 58 in grammar school? K through 12, a 58, even in most colleges, a 58. Now, I know society is kind of lowering standards, but I'm going to tell you what, I'm pretty sure that a 58, even with lower standards, is still going to be failing. 58 is failing. Winners win. All right, and here at the Intrepid Impact Leadership Show, we sit at the intersection of faith, leadership, and business. So I can tell you what we teach. In a nutshell, we teach winning. But it starts with understanding why we're failing, why leaders are failing. Think about all the leaders in business and politics today. I mean, we literally have atrocious examples of leadership. So Intrepid Impact Leadership Team, our mission is to restore trust in leadership. Again, our mission is to restore trust in leadership. How do we do that? Teaching communication. We have to start with something that we can all agree upon. We can definitely agree that we all speak a different language, and we can agree that we need that common language in order to be successful. So let's establish a common language around the 5 leadership voices, so that way we can win. Winning is the key. Winning. And a 58 is not winning. What's another nuance? And if you've listened in, you'll know that the other 3 voices, the nurturer, creative, and the guardian, 43 plus 9 plus 30 is 82. So what do we see? We see 82% of team members, or the quieter leadership voices, 82% of team members feel misunderstood or undervalued. The quieter leadership voices feel misunderstood or undervalued. Why? Because we're not listening. Are they speaking? Yes, they are speaking, but we shut them down. Think about the nurturer. The nurturer often speaks by caring for others. The creative often speaks future, so not a lot of people understand that. The guardian often speaks by asking questions, but sometimes it's too many, so we shut them down. All of that is important information. So think about it. If you've got a program or a process or a purpose, you need to know, how do we take care of people? You need to know what the future is going to look like, and you need to answer the questions of the guardian, because they are going to take care of the work. They make sure it gets done. So 82% of team members feel misunderstood or undervalued. Well, what is that? That creates a situation where team leaders rarely, if ever, hear the truth from their people. Why? Because we haven't been listening. And I'm included. I'm a quieter voice, but I often show up like a louder voice. So I have done that same thing, not listened to my people appropriately. In fact, some of the best business decisions I have ever made as a business owner and even as an executive were not my ideas. In fact, one of the things I love to say after I got a little bit more experience under my belt was I like to say yes. So I would tell my directors and leaders, give me at least 2 solutions to every problem that you identify, because one of them is going to be right, and I guarantee you it's probably going to be better than the idea that I have. Because the person that's closest to the problem usually has the most experience with solving that problem or some version of it, and it might just take a little bit of a tweaking here and there, but if you don't create a space for them to have a voice that is heard, you are not going to hear it, because they're not going to say it. So you don't hear the truth. You don't hear the truth overtly, and I'm not talking about an overt lie. I mean, think about it. Sometimes we lie. Y'all know that I'm a disciple of Jesus, a Christian. Whatever the common title is for that nowadays. I still lie from time to time, on accident. I'm not intentionally lying, but people with my wiring sometimes embellish. All right. So again, we like to talk about shattering the glittering image here. Well, think about it. What does a white little lie never hurt anybody, right? It does. So think about that magnified in a leadership position and in a team where you end up not hearing the truth from your people. Well, and because of this dynamic, team leaders undermine their influence every day without even knowing it. Without even knowing it. It's important to know that team leaders undermine their influence every day. But I think what's often overlooked is the fact that they don't even know it. They don't even know it. Because the louder voices tend to quiet or override the quieter voices. So we're thinking about 18% of the population, which is just 100 minus 82%. 18% of the population is making the majority of the decisions in business and in leadership in general without taking the input of the other 82%. Now, it doesn't take a lot of calculus to figure out why teams function at less than a 60%. In fact, the true miracle is that anything gets done at all when teams function at an average of failing. How do we even get anything done? How do we get anything done when teams function at a failing? So, what is the big aha here? The big aha is, imagine with me for a moment, what would it look like if every voice around your table was truly heard, valued, and appreciated? What would it look like if everyone had an equal amount of input? Imagine for just a moment. Think about the last leadership team meeting you were in, or the last team meeting you were in, and how many people didn't speak, how many people spoke too much, and what actually got accomplished. How many team meetings do you think are a waste of time? How many team meetings do you have that your team members think are a waste of time? Do you get a lot of blank stares? Do you get a lot of rolling eyes? Dude, nothing drives me more crazy than some rolling eyes. What about looking at the phone? What about checking email during the meetings? All of these are disengagement actions. The team's disengaged. What if everybody were engaged? What if we had that synergy? Right? We talked about that in the previous show. Synergy is the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. You might have seen it before. 2 plus 2 equals 5. I would say that if 2 plus 2 equals 5 in good teamwork, 2 plus 2 equals 20 in great teamwork. I believe that's synergy. You can magnify not only your influence, but magnify the results of the team. Again, thinking about building communication, establishing that language of leadership around the 5 leadership voices, bringing that to true relationships, because I know that the pioneer in the group is a natural leader, very results focused, but he or she needs the creative to drive innovation. He or she needs the guardian to get the details right. He or she needs the nurturer to make sure we're taking care of the team members. He or she needs the connector to make sure the world knows about this brand new idea. So now we have a relationship built on strengths, built on trust. Now we can move into alignment. Like if you're a creative and your job is to stare at spreadsheets all day, in the present, that might not be utilizing your strengths as much. Doesn't mean you can't do the job. All voices can do all jobs. What we're saying here is, can we do that job in a way that capitalizes on your strengths? That's the question. That's true alignment. That's true alignment. From there, then we can go into capacity. Execution is next. Now we're executing the correct way when everyone gets to utilize their giftings, and then we increase capacity. So many people just want to start to alignment and then increase capacity. I've done that. Increase capacity before my systems were in place. In the first business I bought, I increased our capacity. I want to say it was about 65% before I even took the company from paper to electronic. All right, so we had a certain amount of employees when I bought the company. I increased it quite a bit before I had my systems in place, and our profitability suffered greatly. I was just fortunate that we didn't have any kind of, COVID calamity when that was going on. I was lucky, but you might not be so lucky. So we're working on communication here in the 5 leadership voices. So best question to ask yourself, what if every voice at the table were truly valued, heard, and appreciated? And I mentioned this before, but I love going through the Know Yourself to Lead Yourself tool. The content that I'm sharing with you, other than the scriptures and my own experience, is developed by a company called Giant Worldwide. Giant is a content and digital coaching creation company, right? They like to create content, digital platforms, and information that consultants like myself can use to transmit ideas in an understandable way. So a lot of these tools that you see me use, Know Yourself to Lead Yourself, is a picture that can probably encompass reading 2 or 3 books. This Know Yourself to Lead Yourself here tool starts with tendencies. How many times have you read a book about tendencies? Oh, I have a tendency to do this, or my personality tends to do this, or my experience in life tends to do this. Nature, nurture, choice drive your tendencies. Nature, how you were born, your wiring. Nurture, how you were raised. And then choice, the things that you've chosen to do. Your tendencies and your leadership behaviors are driven by those 3 things. Well, that creates patterns of behavior that dictate your actions if left unchecked. And then going around the figure 8 here, then we see consequences. Actions have consequences. Actions have consequences. And then those consequences are the things that shapes our reality. And here's the point. If you don't like your reality, if you don't like how your team operates, if you don't like how your family operates, if you don't like how the community involvement is, look at the reality and say, okay, what are the things that got us here? What were the things that are undesirable, the undesirable outcomes of the actions that got us here? For example, and then lastly, what's the patterns of behavior going in the backwards? Now, do we have tendencies? Companies have tendencies. People have tendencies. Communities have tendencies. Think about the different cultures in the world, right? If you're in America, we tend to have a pioneering tendency. If you're in, say, Northern Europe, you might find an introverted tendency, right? You think about people in the South, like we like to sit outside and enjoy the air, but people in the northern parts of the country, they wouldn't necessarily sit on their front porch. They have more of a working attitude, right? Those are the tendencies of different cultures, tendencies of different countries. So we have tendencies as individuals and also as organizations. So the whole point is know yourself to lead yourself. Know your tendencies. Know your foundational voice. By the time this series is done, you should know your foundational voice. And again, know yourself to lead yourself will literally set you free. Literally will set you free. So we're talking about the 5 leadership voices. Today's leadership voice is 4th on the list and almost the loudest. And we say loudest, but we're talking about the strength of the voice. This is the connector voice. The connector. The connector, again, like I said, is 11% of the population, future-oriented. They're all about relational networks, collaboration, and effective communication. Connectors are very good at communicating. All right, so before we go through the tendencies, I want to remind you of some assumptions that we covered in the previous episodes. Okay? First is your voice is made up of all 5 voices. So you'll have a voice order. A voice order. So from quietest to loudest, the voice order is nurture, creative, guardian, connector, pioneer. But Jerry's voice order is creative, connector, pioneer, nurturer, guardian. All right? So we have a voice order. Some voices are more natural than others. For me, creative is my foundational voice. Connector is very natural for me. And I do speak pioneer pretty well also. Now, I've learned to speak nurturer. And I've learned to speak guardian. But those are things that are hard for me. and quite frankly are challenging, very challenging. And you're going to have challenging voices as well. But remember, maturity allows us to value the contribution of each voice. And so as you mature, the more mature the leader, the harder it is to determine your voice also. We've all taken those personality tests where, we're a badger or a bear or a box turtle or a beaver or whatever, right? I think I was a peacock and an owl. And I don't know how you can be a peacock and an owl at the same time, right? But here we're choosing our voice. Because here's the thing. We all speak all 5 voices. And in fact, in our worst setting, like when we're at our worst, sometimes we speak the opposite voice. We speak the worst version of that voice, but it's the opposite. So sometimes we can show up in a certain way, but that's not our foundational voice. Because remember, we all speak all 5 voices. Like I said before, nature, nurture, choice all play a part. Nature, how you're wired, nurture, how you're raised, and choices. For example, Jerry chose to run hospitals. Jerry chose to be a United States Marine. Jerry chose to become a certified jail inspector. Those were choices. No one gets the credit from that but me. Think about the choices you've made in your life, how that's shaped not only your career, but also your background and your tendencies. Your tendencies. You got to own your actions. Don't assume you know what someone else's foundational voice is either. It's not appropriate for you to tell somebody what their voice is. It's not appropriate for you to tell somebody what their voice is. And in fact, if they take a test and they test as, say, guardian pioneer, right? It's not to say that, oh, you're a guardian pioneer. That's, you do this bad, you do that bad. Not at all. What it is a way for them to look at that and think of it like a coat to try on. Let's try this coat on for 30 days, see how it fits. So when we start to learn these tendencies of the voices, rewatching the various videos that we produced here, learning those voices will help you understand how you communicate and how others communicate. See if there's any dissonance between how you communicate. We'll look at that when we look at the 5 voices dynamics tool again. But there's dissonance. We call it the nemesis voice. And then last, don't assume you know what each word means. Remember, I will define what a nurturer is. I will define what a connector is. All right? We try to use voices or words that mean the similar things, but a lot of people get caught up in the nurturer being just caring for others. But candidly, you might find nurturers often in law enforcement, military, those situations that require selfless action. So it's a little bit different than just getting coffee for everybody. Now, today's voice is the connector. Connectors are champions of relational networks, internal collaboration, and effective communication. Connectors are the most unique when it comes to relational networks because they can maintain about 150 best friends. There is no half-life on the relationship with a connector. What does that mean? Well, a half-life means that it diminishes over time. There is no diminishment of a relationship with a connector because if that connector spoke to you 5 years ago and they see you tomorrow, it would be as if they were talking to you today. They are going to miss you greatly, but it will be like one of your best, closest friends. And you'll think to yourself, am I? Well, they're certainly very excited, so I must be one of their best friends. Yay. And that's how they make you feel. They make you feel wonderful about the relationship because they're all about maintaining those relationships. They're very empathic. They're very extroverted, so they're going out. They're always out meeting people. They're energized by others. They love new ideas. They love sharing with others. I always like to say, put the connectors at the front of your organization. Give them, if you can afford it, give them an unlimited expense budget and have them go tell the world. And it's very important to the connector that they are trusted, that they're a trusted advisor. The other thing I love about connectors is they make those connections. They always know a guy that can get a thing. So they can bring an enormous amount of opportunity for resources into your organization if properly deployed. If properly deployed. And you can think about that as a team. How would you deploy your team into the world? Well, you would use their strengths. I was in the Marine Corps, so we think about military deployments as taking what's most relevant. Like, I wouldn't take a tanks unit to an island campaign. All right, so let's not take the one of the stronger voices, the best collaborator, and sit him behind a desk all day. Probably not going to work out well. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about the voices and the connector. So let's look at some insight or some bullet points, I would say, about the connector. They're persuasive and inspirational communicators, rallying people to causes and things that they believe in. Again, it's really important that people believe in them as well as the idea that they're conveying. See, their ideas and their modus operandi are all mixed into one. Very intertwined lifestyle. They're incredibly resourceful. Whatever we need, I can get it, or I have a source. They have the capacity to maintain a large number of relationships. I mean, today's world, where we're super connected via social media networks, it is a connector's dream. Because they can have 1,000 connections. They'll know something about all of them. And like I said before, 150 best friends. And to them, it's not, you think about that, some people think that's disingenuous. It's not. It's their superpower. So if you as a leader are leading connector, you can take advantage of that. And they're going to be happy at the same time. That's why it's so important to understand our tendencies and our strengths and weapons and superpowers. They know how to connect people with their aspirations as well. So they make excellent leaders, excellent mentors. Again, my second voice is connector. Why? Because I see the future of people. Now, I'm a creative connector, which means I'm introverted, and I see the farthest into the future for that person. But then I have an ability to back that into a strategic plan that goes right into what they want to achieve if they execute. So connectors have that ability to connect people and their aspirations. However, keep this in mind, and this is how you lead them. They need appreciation and credit for making key connections. Asking the question, are you aware of what I have done? Are you aware of what I've done? You're going to make the connector's day if you were connected to another person by them and you show the gratitude for that. So let's say that John connected you with Kenita, and then Kenita and John formed a great relationship, and then John recommended Kenita talk to Jerry. Well, I can make John's day by saying, Kenita is so great, thanks so much for introducing me. That's all it takes. Connectors can ride that compliment for weeks, and they'll know that they have purpose and meaning in the world and in your life. They love being influencers. They're very charismatic communicators as well. They do have people-pleasing tendencies, meaning they often struggle to bring effective challenge. Struggling to bring effective challenge. What does effective challenge look like? Well, it's telling somebody that they need to improve in an area. Because they're feelers, so they're very empathic, and they don't want to damage that relationship, so they struggle to bring effective challenge. They often struggle also to hear or engage fully with critical feedback, so they don't want to hear negative stuff about themselves either. Here's how you handle that. Bring your challenge, that's okay. You can bring that feedback, but compliment them first. There was I believe it was a football coach that coined it. It might have been Bear Bryant that said, use the sandwich approach. Don't quote me on that because I'm not sure it was him. But start with something positive, bring the challenge, end with something positive. They'll be much better for it, and so will you, because they'll actually hear you. Right? So looking at the percentages here, we can see that there's 43% nurturer, 9% creative, 30% guardian, and 11% connector. That means that out of 10 people, one's a connector. Not a lot of connectors out there, but a lot of connectors are known because they know a lot of people. So remember, one connector has 150 best friends and 1,000 relationships. All right? So connectors are usually well known. They're not hard to find. Remember, relational networks, effective communication, and internal collaboration. So bullet points here, remember, you need to watch out because connectors interpret challenge of their ideas as personal. Remember, they're wired. They're what we call feelers, right? So feelers are very wired into everything they do. They take as personal any kind of feedback or challenge. So you got to start with something positive, or prep them, having them put on their body armor, and then deliver that challenge. And you can empower them by giving them time to share their ideas, passions, and appreciate before you critique, right? Here's the thing. When you're dealing with a connector, just know that whatever they're trying to deliver to you is going to take longer than you probably have time for. So prep yourself, because they want to tell you the beginning, the middle, and the end. They always want you to understand why it's so important to them, because they're very passionate about new ideas. And here's the thing. You can empower them by giving them time. Now, connectors, here's some things to work on. Here's some insights. Here's the things that I want you to at least take 2 of them and work on it. If you feel like connector is your foundational voice, these are the things you need to do. Now, if you're leading a connector, this is how you lead them. All right. So first, when people reject a connector's idea, it's not as personal as it feels. They're not saying that you're bad. They're saying that the idea might not work. And they might not be saying no. They might just be saying not right now. Hinting at frustrations with the teammates does not guarantee anyone has truly heard you. Connectors, you might want to be a little more direct in a leadership position so people are not confused. You don't need to beat around the bush. People will critique your ideas. Try and avoid becoming overly defensive too soon. People have to critique the ideas. So you got to remember, the other half of the population is the thinker, and thinkers need to test the validity of the idea, and they usually do that with questions. Remember, it's okay to be you. When you believe something passionately, never be afraid to share it. Never be afraid to share it. We love you because you're so passionate, right? Remember, I'm a creative connector. One of the things my wife always says, she's a thinker. She says, I always loved you because you're so passionate. So don't be afraid to be you. When you speak, complete your sentences and stay focused on one idea at a time. If you have watched any of these shows, you know that I kind of go off on these little tangents here and there. That's the reason why I love using slides, because it keeps me on track. So connectors, you can use slides, you can use bullet points. If you're leading a connector, you can tell them to do the same thing. Have them agenda. Remember, those introverted people are going to need that agenda. Remember, be intentional. Take time to think through how you can create a culture where the other voices can bring their best. See, connectors, you get so excited about a thing that you're overriding the dialogue. Remember, you're 4th on the list. So nurturers go first, creative go next, then the guardians ask their questions, then connectors get to contribute. That's how you create that culture where everyone feels empowered. Last, be patient with those whose due diligence process is rigorous, painful, and time-consuming. Who are we talking about here? Well, due diligence, efficient systems, processes. We're talking about guardians. Be patient with the guardians, connectors. They're the ones that are getting the job done. They're the ones that are filling in the gaps that your great idea has not yet accomplished. So remember, be patient. Be patient. And when we look at the 5 voices dynamics, you're going to see the connectors in the top right. What that means is they make decisions based on people and values first, then they might incorporate logic later, and that they're future-oriented. Well, remember, I was talking about the guardians just a second ago. Guardians are what we call the nemesis voice. There's a dissonance. Think about a wave sign, a sine wave, and then think about one that's jagged, or think about 2 that are out of balance. Think about a guitar that is out of tune. A guitar that's out of tune is like the guardian and the connector trying to talk. That's why they're on the opposite sides of the grid there. Keep that in mind. Painful, rigorous, and time-consuming. But due diligence is important. So when we think about the 5 voices dynamics, we know that connectors are future and people. Future and people. Guardians, you can see, we talked about them. They're present and logical. Nurturers are people and present. We talked about the creative. Creatives are in both categories, but always future. Some can be logical and some are very people-oriented. And when we think about the connector's strengths, again, we're talking about harmony, connection, ideas, vision. Connectors love that stuff. You can get the connectors really excited with what you're passionate about. and then they will go tell the world. If you have a new idea, tell the connectors. They will tell everybody else. If you have an organization that needs marketing, hire a connector. They will get everybody excited about it. Last but not least, love talking about the Bible. You know, here at Intrepid Impact Leadership, we sit at the intersection of faith, leadership, and business, which to us are as inseparable as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So I would be remiss if I didn't tell you who my connectors are from the Bible. Now, I did a little research into what people are saying, and a lot of people think certain Bible characters have certain characteristics that go with certain personalities. I'm giving you my opinion, and that's all this is. I'm not a Bible scholar or any of that, but I am certified in a lot of this personality stuff, and I love God's Word. So here's my connectors. My connector from the Old Testament, she's also a female, is Esther. Esther. My favorite connector from the Old Testament is Esther. Why? She was likable. Everybody loved Esther. She won favor. She won the favor of everyone she met. She won the favor of everyone who saw her, but she also had those people-pleasing tendencies as well. We see that when effective challenge needed to be brought to the king. She struggled to bring effective challenge, both about her background. Now, mind you, that was probably a good idea because there was some persecution back then. And later, she had to bring effective challenge to the king about Haman, right? But Mordecai pressed her. And again, good reason. I'm so glad that she brought that challenge. But she had good reason for being concerned, but she still had to be pushed. So we can see the connectors' people-pleasing tendencies. We call them feelers. She liked the limelight, you know, but she had problems bringing that challenge. But ultimately, she trusted in God, and she became that leader worth following. She said, okay, fast for 3 days, and I'll get this done. And of course, the Jews were restored. Now, think persuasive and think bold when we think connectors, right? Now, who's another one? This might be a little bit controversial, but I was digging deep into this one, and I like, from the New Testament, I like the disciple of Jesus, also the beloved disciple. I like John as the connector. I like John. Why? Well, he was considered the beloved disciple. He has feeler attributes. Jesus apparently loved him the most, and John didn't hesitate to say that. So think about the connectors. Connectors are always selling that idea. John said that in his gospel a number of times. The disciple that Jesus loved. All right, and he was found to be at Jesus' heart right there, right? Especially in meetings. He had grandiose aspirations. Think about how he wrote his gospel. He wrote his gospel. In the beginning, there was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh. That's huge, man. That's talking about the creator of heavens and the earth coming all the way down to mingle with us. That's Jesus as the God, right? And then here's the other one. This is a little more relevant to humans because he was actually one of the disciples that asked to sit next to Jesus in the throne room of grace. In heaven could he sit beside him. I mean, that's bold. But connectors are bold. They don't mind asking those questions, being out in the community, talking to people. Nothing wrong with that. Now, connectors also get very excited. They can get very wound up. Why do we see that? We see impulsiveness when he asked Jesus to call down fire for the non-hospitable behavior that the other town created for them. Let's call down fire, right? And so we've wondered why James and John were considered the sons of thunder. Well, that's probably why, right? And I love the macro style communicator he was. He's a big picture communicator, of course, responsible for the fourth gospel. And it was very exciting, but here's the point of it. It was so, and he says this, so that you will believe. So that you will believe. Think about Luke. The difference between him and Luke is Luke wanted you to understand facts. Of course he wanted you to believe, but he was more about facts and details. John was more about inspiration and excitement. That's a connector all day. So those are my biblical connectors. We got Esther and the Apostle John, who also wrote the fourth gospel. My connectors, love them. Persuasive and bold. Folks, this has been another wonderful show of the Intrepid Impact Leadership Channel. We talked about the connector voice today. I love it for you to continue to tune in. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the show. Again, the more people that get this information, the better we can restore trust in leadership. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.
82% of team members feel misunderstood or undervalued. So this is exactly where I like to be. Teaching, communicating, helping others, realizing their aspirations. I'm so excited about shattering the glittering image and uncovering the truth about you.